Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something that, well, sounds almost unreal. Elected leaders running a government from a prison cell. It's a scenario that was actually happening in parts of India until very recently. But now there's this huge legislative push underway that could change everything.
A really fundamental shift being proposed.
Exactly. We're talking about a set of brand new and frankly highly controversial bills introduced in India just days ago, August 20th, 2025. And these aren't just small tweaks, they propose something quite radical. If a top leader, think Prime Minister, Chief Minister, is detained for 30 straight days on serious criminal charges, they'd automatically lose their job.
Just like that. 30 days and you're out.
So our job today is to really unpack this for you. It's incredibly complex, very high stakes. We'll look at the government's reasoning, which they argue is quite bold. Then there's the opposition's reaction. They're calling it a draconian power grab. And of course, the massive constitutional questions this all throws up. We need to understand why it's ignited such a fierce debate, what the actual stakes are for democracy in, a country of over 1 billion people. It's just fascinating to me how quickly this went from being like an unthinkable hypothetical to actual proposed laws.
It is. And what's really compelling here isn't just the, let's say, the political theater of it all. It's the tension underneath, that delicate balance, right, between accountability for leaders, due process under the law, and crucially, the stability of governments that people elected.
That's a tough needle to thread.
It really is. And if you look at the bigger picture, it forces a question. How do we as a society define the level of integrity needed for high public office, especially when someone's facing serious charges but hasn't actually been convicted yet?
Right. The whole innocent until proven guilty idea seems challenged here.
That's definitely part of the debate.
Okay, so let's get specific. It's not just one bill, is it?
No, it's a package deal. 3 bills introduced together on August 20th by the Union Home Minister Amit Shah in the Lok Sabha. You've got the Constitution, 130th Amendment Bill, 2025. Then the Government of Union Territories Amendment Bill, 2025. And finally, the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Amendment Bill, 2025.
Okay, quite a mouthful, but what's the core message across all 3?
The core message is simple and very firm. They draw a line. Any prime minister, chief minister, or even a minister held in detention for 30 consecutive days on serious criminal charges, and serious here means carrying a potential sentence of at least 5 years, they're automatically out of office on day 31.
Automatically removed.
Yeah.
And critically, this isn't about being found guilty after a trial.
Not at all. That's the absolute key distinction here. It's purely about prolonged detention. Just being held for that long is the trigger.
Wow. So it sidesteps the whole judicial process in a way, for the purpose of holding office at least.
You could certainly argue that. It prioritizes, let's say, the perceived propriety of governance over the completion of the legal process for conviction. It's a significant shift.
And who actually does the removing? Is that spelled out?
Yes, it is. For the prime minister, the president takes action. For a state chief minister, it's the governor. And for ministers in states or union territories, the power lies with the chief minister or the lieutenant governor, respectively.
So it assigns responsibility clearly. But it also puts appointed officials, presidents, governors, lieutenant governors in the position of removing elected leaders.
Exactly. And that's where many of the concerns about potential political influence and the undermining of federalism start to surface. How independent will those actions really be?
A very valid question. Okay, let's pivot to the government side. Why do they say this is necessary? They've been quite forceful.
They have. Prime Minister Modi gave a speech in Gaya, Bihar, just a couple of days after the bills were introduced on August 22nd. And he made this comparison that really resonated, or was designed to resonate. He asked, essentially, if a government clerk or a driver or a peon gets jailed, they lose their job, right?
Standard procedure usually.
So why, he asked, should a chief minister or even a prime minister get the privilege, as he put it, of governing from jail? He even said the law applies to him, too.
So framing it as an issue of equality before the law, removing special privileges for the powerful.
Precisely. It's presented as part of a wider anti-corruption drive, a way to boost public trust and uphold what they call constitutional morality. They point to past situations where leaders did continue running things from detention as evidence that this gap needs closing.
And Amit Shah, who introduced the bills, he used his own history, didn't he?
He did. He mentioned that he resigned as Gujarat's home minister back in 2010 before he was arrested in connection with a case, and he only returned to office after the courts cleared him. His quote was pretty direct. "We cannot be so shameless as to cling to power while facing charges."
So positioning it as a matter of personal and political ethics.
Yes, using his own experience to bolster the argument for this new standard. And look, there are recent examples that fit their narrative. Arvind Kejriwal, the Delhi chief minister, spent nearly 6 months in jail in 2024, but continued, technically, as chief minister from custody until he got bail.
Right. I remember the headlines about files being sent to jail.
Exactly. And then there was the Tamil Nadu minister, V. Senthil Balaji. He was arrested but remained a minister without portfolio for a significant period.
So under these new rules,
Under these new rules, both would have been automatically removed from their posts after 30 days of detention. No question.
Modi specifically mentioned the files being signed from detention scenario, didn't he? Kind of taking aim at Kejriwal.
He did. He framed it as, if leaders have such an attitude, how can we fight corruption? He also contrasted it with past actions by Congress, suggesting they sought to protect leaders.
Okay, so the government's case is built on parity, anti-corruption, and citing specific examples. But the opposition sees this very, very differently.
Oh, absolutely. The reaction was immediate and intense.
Draconian. That was the word used right there on the floor of the Lok Sabha when Shah introduced the bills. Reports mentioned chaos, torn papers, shouting.
Yes, it was not a calm debate. The core accusation from the opposition is that these laws are ripe for misuse, specifically political misuse.
How so? What's the specific fear?
The fear centers on central investigative agencies like the Enforcement Directorate, the ED, or the Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI. The concern is that these agencies, which report to the central government, could be used to target opposition leaders.
So initiate an investigation, make an arrest, keep the leader detained for 30 days, and boom, they're out of office, regardless of the case's merit.
That's precisely the scenario they're painting. Priyanka Gandhi Vadra from Congress put it starkly. Tomorrow, you can slap any case on a chief minister, detain them for 30 days, and they're out. No trial, no conviction.
That really captures the essence of their fear. It bypasses the courts for removal.
Exactly. Another Congress MP, Abhishek Manu Singhvi, called the bills the best way to destabilize opposition governments using biased arrests.
And there are constitutional arguments, too.
Yes. Asaduddin Owaisi from AMIM argued these bills fundamentally violate the basic structure of the Constitution. He specifically mentioned federalism, the division of power between the center and states, and the separation of powers between the executive, legislature, and judiciary.
How would it violate separation of powers?
His argument is that it essentially lets the executive agencies, through arrest and detention, act as judge, jury, and executioner regarding someone's fitness to hold elected office, undermining the judiciary's role.
I see. And the Aam Aadmi Party, having seen their leader jailed, they called it a step towards dictatorship, right?
Yeah.
Targeting opposition states.
Yes. Their reaction was very strong, clearly colored by their recent experiences with central agencies.
So a really sharp divide. Government says accountability, opposition says weaponization. But you mentioned something interesting earlier. Not everyone in the opposition was completely against the idea.
Right. This adds a fascinating wrinkle. Shafi Tharoor, also from Congress, actually expressed some cautious support for the intent behind the bills. He admitted he hadn't studied them fully yet, but said, quote, "On the face of it, it seems reasonable that those accused of serious wrongdoing shouldn't hold high office."
Wow. That shows just how complex this is, when even within the main opposition party, there's some acknowledgement of the underlying problem the government claims to be addressing.
It really does. It suggests the principle that maybe leaders facing serious charges shouldn't govern has some resonance, even if the proposed mechanism is highly contested.
And this ties into something else, a report about politicians facing criminal cases.
Yes, exactly. A report by the Association for Democratic Reforms, the ADR, they do a lot of work on transparency in politics. Their data paints a pretty stark picture. They found that currently 40% of India's chief ministers are facing criminal cases of some kind.
40%. That's quite a number. How does that affect this debate?
Well, it cuts both ways, doesn't it? On one hand, the government can point to that statistic and say, see, we told you there's a problem. This proves reform is needed.
It makes their case seem stronger, yes.
But on the other hand, the opposition can look at that same number and say, look how many leaders could potentially be targeted. This isn't about reform. It's about destabilizing nearly half the states.
It makes the potential impact or the potential for misuse seem enormous.
Absolutely. It highlights that this isn't just about a few isolated cases, it's about a systemic issue. And applying this kind of rule could lead to massive political upheaval, especially since, as the ADR report also notes, these cases often drag on in the courts for years and years without resolution.
So relying on detention, not conviction, becomes even more potent if 40% of potential targets have existing cases.
Precisely. It fuels the suspicion that this could be used strategically against opponents, particularly in states not run by the ruling party at the center.
Which brings us back to the legal challenges. You mentioned the basic structure doctrine. Could that be used to strike these laws down?
It's very likely going to be invoked if these bills pass. The Supreme Court has held that certain fundamental aspects of the Constitution, like federalism, separation of powers, democratic principles, cannot be amended away by Parliament. The argument would be that allowing appointed officials or central agencies to remove elected state leaders based merely on detention undermines these basic principles, particularly federalism.
So a big court battle seems almost inevitable.
Almost certainly, yes. And then there's the whole question of how these bills were introduced.
Right, you mentioned the timing and process raised some flags.
Yes. Introduced August 20th during the monsoon session, apparently with little advance notice, the Lok Sabha speaker reportedly relaxed some procedural rules to allow their introduction. This led to accusations that the government was trying to rush them through without adequate debate or scrutiny.
And politically, can they even pass them easily?
Well, the ruling NDA coalition doesn't have the two-thirds majority in Parliament typically needed for constitutional amendments, so they'll need support from allies, possibly some maneuvering. However, the fact they've now been referred to a joint parliamentary committee suggests there's at least a recognition that more scrutiny is needed, or perhaps it's a way to build broader consensus.
Okay, so the process is also part of the controversy. Now let's think about the average person, the citizen, watching all this. It feels like a real dilemma.
It absolutely is. On one side, you have this visceral reaction, perhaps, that it just feels wrong for a leader to govern from jail, especially when, as PM Modi pointed out, a regular government employee would likely be suspended almost immediately. Why the double standard? That argument has pulled.
It taps into a sense of basic fairness.
Definitely. But then on the other side, there's this deep-seated fear, fueled by past controversies, about the misuse of powerful central agencies like the ED and CBI.
Agencies that have faced accusations of being, let's say, selectively enthusiastic in their investigations.
Precisely. Even the Supreme Court has cautioned these agencies at times. So people worry. Could these new laws become tools for political vendettas? Could an inconvenient opposition leader just be arrested and held for 30 days to get them out of the way?
That's the crux of the fear. Principle versus potential for abuse.
Exactly. It's a classic democratic tension. How do you ensure accountability without opening the door to tyranny?
And beyond the principles, what about just the practical side? What happens if a chief minister is suddenly removed? Does the government just collapse?
That's a huge practical question. It could certainly lead to instability, finding a successor, potential splits within the ruling party in that state, maybe even triggering fresh elections or periods of president's rule.
So potential for chaos, really.
Yeah, the potential is definitely there. And then looming over it all, how will the courts eventually rule on a law that equates detention, which isn't proof of guilt, with disqualification from office? That's legally groundbreaking in this context.
If you had to pick the single biggest unknown here, if these bills actually become law, what would it be?
For me, the biggest unknown is the long-term health of India's federal system. If state leaders feel constantly vulnerable to removal by central action based on detention, not conviction, it could fundamentally change the relationship between the center and the states. It could create a chilling effect, making state governments less willing to assert their autonomy.
Undermining that cooperative federalism idea.
Potentially, yes. The risk of disruption to governance, the sheer uncertainty it introduces, it goes beyond just politics. It touches the stability of the whole system.
Okay, so let's try and bring this together as we wrap up. We've explored this situation. India really at a crossroads here. On one side, a government move framed as bold action for accountability. On the other, serious warnings about political overreach and destabilization.
It's a constitutional drama playing out in real time.
Asking really fundamental questions, isn't it? About power, about good governance, about the health of democracy itself.
And when you factor in that ADR statistic, 40% of chief ministers facing cases, you realize the potential impact isn't theoretical. It could be widespread, truly transformative. Whether for better or worse, that's the billion-dollar question.
It forces a huge national conversation about what we expect from leaders and how we enforce those expectations.
Absolutely.
So maybe the thought to leave everyone with is this. As we try to clean up politics, get more accountability, where is that line? The line between upholding the law and, protecting democracy itself from being weaponized.
That's the tightrope every democracy walks, isn't it? Finding that balance is crucial.
And how India navigates this specific path with these bills will certainly be something the world watches very closely.